It's Primus Tracks with Josh and Frankie.
What a couple of dumps.
Hello, Primates! Primus fans of all ages. Primus fans who might be Bastardos. Primus fans who wouldn't classify themselves as such. You found Primus Tracks. Congratulations. We are at Primus Tracks on Instagram and Twitter. I am Josh, and right over there is Frankie.
Hi, Josh.
Hello, Frankie. Now, in that massive brain of yours, Los Bastardos, I mean, what are we in for today?
All right, so as we mentioned before, Primus has this tradition with their studio records where they begin and end the albums with the same song or a variation of the song. And Seas of Cheese is no exception. Although the album does start with Seas of Cheese, I mean, it's only 42 seconds long. So we could classify Here Come the Bastards as the first actual song in conventional terms on the record. So the fact that Los Bastardos closes the record is Primus carrying on this tradition that they started with Frizzle Fry, a tradition that would go on for several albums.
Yeah, a tradition unlike any other.
That's right.
That's a golf thing, I'm sorry.
You know, it's a really interesting track because, you know, we're going to go into that in detail. It's got a lot of sampling, it's got a lot of guests, it's got a lot of things going on. So it's going to be a pretty interesting track to break down.
Not necessarily your typical Primus track, so get ready for that one. But, of course, we have some business to take care of first. We have some new entrants into the Punch Bowl. I should say they're new to us. We actually have a couple of Apple Podcast reviews from Canada and one from the UK today. I've been remiss about checking the Apple Podcast reviews page from other countries other than the United States. So I'm going to start regularly checking Canada, the UK, Australia, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, probably not Gibraltar, but I'll do my best. If you leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts from a country other than the United States, you can do one of two things. You can send us a screenshot at Primus Tracks on Instagram or Twitter. Even if it's not in English, I'll give it my best shot. But or you can just poke us and say, hey, go check Apple Podcasts for insert country here, whatever it might be. We will try to keep up on that. With that in mind, our first new, quote-unquote new, entrant into the Punch Bowl is Miller Menace, who actually left this review in June from the UK. And Miller Menace writes, "We're hitting the high gears. So glad to have jumped on board this magnificent ship. Gonna be sailing along with you all the way. Well, it's great to have you. And keep up the good work, a must for any true Primus fans." Thank you, Miller Menace, all the way from the UK. We have a couple from Canada as well. Great program, says Daryl R. Judd, 1979. Now, Daryl's actually been on top of this from day one. I think I posted a link to the podcast in one of those Primus Facebook groups, and he jumped right on it.
Right.
Probably our most loyal fan, so tip of the hat to you, Daryl. He says, "This is great for old and new fans. I consider myself pretty knowledgeable in the Primus world, and yet I keep learning new tidbits of info from Frankie and Josh." I'm going to editorialize and say mostly Frankie, I bet. Back to Daryl. He says, I really like the live breakdowns of each song. Keep up the good work, you bastards. He goes on to say, "It's the highlight of my day when I see there's a new track added, and looking forward to having more guests, Tim Soya style." Definitely more coming your way, Daryl. Get ready. And our other review from Canada is from RDK80, who says, "Glad I came, glad I'm here." Ah, another wonderful lyrical reference. That's a good one. As someone who doesn't know a lot of Primus fans, it's great to have a little podcast that celebrates the odd, absurd, yet virtuous catalog of Primus. Virtuous is not a word. I'm editorializing again. Virtuous is not a word I've heard to describe Primus, so that's wonderful. Josh and Frankie make for a great team, and they have great guests come on, like Tim Soya and Joe Gore. Maybe one of these days they'll get one of the boys or even Cheney. Keep up the good work, guys. We'll be staying with this one for a while. Well, RDK80, yeah, that's the dream, but don't hold your breath.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, if we have a band member on, I think there will be a collective aneurysm. So maybe it's best that they don't come on. We'll see. But once again, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can join the Punch Bowl. It's such an exclusive club. You get so many benefits that I can't go into right now. But if you run into somebody who's in the Punch Bowl, I'm sure they'll be sporting their Punch Bowl regalia, and you can ask them all about the wonderful things going on in this all-inclusive club.
Somebody also pointed out this week, or maybe it was the week before, they are enjoying the live clips that we've been playing recently. and they would like to know which show each one comes from. So we're going to do our best to direct you to the specific date and venue of the live clips we play.
Yeah, absolutely. So we usually give the info on the podcast, but if we drop it on our social media with some links, maybe Instagram, not the best for links, but if you follow us on Twitter, I'm going to start putting some links on the Twitter, or maybe Frankie will do it. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I don't know if he will. So we'll work it out. We'll see if we can get that stuff out there for you guys. And we have a little bit of miscellaneous debris today. We actually have 2 tracks worth of miscellaneous debris today because of our recording schedule. So let's go all the way back to track 11 of Sailing the Seas of Cheese, those damn blue-collar tweakers. And if you follow us on Instagram, you know that we solved the mystery. Well, we didn't, but loyal listeners helped us solve the mystery of the Blue Room in the lyrics. A trip or two to the Blue Room would help him do the trick, as in this guy that needed to keep up with the youngsters hanging drywall. It's a portable toilet. You know, the kind you see at job sites and music festivals. I should have known this. Once it was revealed to me, it seemed so obvious. Because you see them everywhere. They're ubiquitous. It doesn't matter where you go. So thank you to Travis in Alaska for pointing that out. I'm not going to tell you which Travis in Alaska it is because there are hundreds of them at this point that listen to this podcast. So Travis in Alaska, you know who you are. And as far as Fish On goes, I have a couple little things here. Somebody on Instagram with the wonderful handle Froops sent us a link to a promo video for the 5.1 release of Seas of Cheese. And I remember watching this years ago. It was released, put on the YouTubes in 2014 or so. And Les actually explains how Larry got the sound of the fish in the freakout part of Fish On, because I think I must have asked how he got that sustain. So I'm going to click a couple of buttons and let's listen to Les Claypool explaining it in his own words.
The whole notion of the solo section is it's supposed to replicate the battle with a large fish. You know, Larry's playing his guitar with he built this box that he got this little motor from Radio Shack and stuck a 9-volt battery in it. He used to actually take the motor and put the 9-volt battery and hold the wires and go, and that's how he made that sound of the reel buzzing and the fish taking off, and so you hear all that zipping around the room, and
that's pretty rad. So Larry did a little bit of kit bashing and put together his own effect for that track.
Nice.
A little bit of home engineering there at Fantasy Studios while they're putting Fish On together. The other piece we have regarding Fish On is that Daryl, same Daryl who just left us a 5-star review, or whose 5-star review I just found, I should say. I was chatting with him, and he says that he swears that he heard from Les Claypool in an interview that the line 100-pound sturgeon on a 20-pound test, that in actuality, as far as the story itself or the actual events, that the 100-pound sturgeon was not actually caught on a 20-pound test. I knew it! Les is making it up. He's exaggerating. It's a fishing story. The reasoning being is that I guess he changed the number in the lyrics because the number 20 flowed a lot better lyrically, and the actual value didn't. Okay, that's fine. You know, if it's 23 3/4 or something. But you know the Grinch song. You know the Grinch Who Stole Christmas.
Right.
Okay, so in the Grinch song, "You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch," that one. If in that song they can work in the term 39.5-foot pole, I think Les could have worked in the actual value of that test and been fine. And maybe done like a little tribute by using that deep baritone. A 20-pound test. You know, that'd have been fun. That's our miscellaneous debris for Tweakers and Fish On. If you have any information that we missed about the tracks as we cover them, tag us on Instagram or Twitter, and we would be glad, if we can verify the information, to share your knowledge on this podcast.
You just called me a bastard, didn't you?
Land ho, Frankie! We've reached the end of Sailing the Seas of Cheese. I guess you previewed today's track for us, and it really is, I call it a merry jaunt, even though it's a little more demented than that. But the cool part is it includes a whole host of Primus friends. So let's unpack the final track of Sailing the Seas of Cheese, Los Bastardos. I'll start with this. It really is kind of a cool, fun album closer in that similar spirit to Frizzle Fry, where things wrap around from the first track or the first and second tracks. And all these guys are just throwing everything they have at the Here Come the Bastards riff and just jamming it out. And of course, as Ron Rigler told us many weeks ago, this was their last day at Fantasy Studios in Berkeley. So why not have just this big blowout and have all your friends in and jam it out? And as the story goes, they jammed on this riff for a solid 13 minutes. And Ron just was changing the tapes. They kept playing, and he kept changing the tapes, or changing the reels as they kept playing. And from what I understand, we get the last about 2.5 minutes of this track. And Frankie, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it was fully formed as it is on the record, because they picked the portion of the jam that they wanted for the closing.
Right. That's something really amazing
Yeah.
that we learned from Ron. So they actually cherry-picked the best bits from the full jam session. So what we hear on the record could be described as some sort of musical Frankenstein, right?
I would think so, yeah, if they're picking and choosing and slamming it together. All the sound effects that we hear and the sampling and the vocals weren't even a part of it in the moment when those guys were all jamming on their instruments. My understanding is the band went back with Adam Gates and Mike Borden and did some vocals, and Les and Adam dropped in some samples and some sound effects, and that became the track. So it took a little bit of extra work after the fact, but it's all rooted in this really fun, chaotic, insane jam.
And, there's an interesting parallel there, because by taking different bits from the performance and putting them together to make a track, that's exactly what Edgar Winter was doing with the song that would end up being called Frankenstein.
Oh, sure,
so
yeah.
He jammed with his band, and they chose the best bits, and that's why they called the song that way. And the interesting parallel here is that Frankenstein is one of the rarest Primus covers ever, because they have only performed that song twice.
I know one of them was New Year's Eve 2012, correct?
Right, and the next one was in Mexico City in 2013. So I actually got that one.
Oh, you lucky dog. Are you serious you got that one? Oh, my
Yeah.
goodness. That must have been so cool. I only know the New Year's Eve 2012 one because I went to the show the night before, and they didn't play it.
Awesome.
Oh, man. I got Electric Funeral, but I did not get Frankenstein. Cool. I'm so glad you got that one. I think we're going to have to throw it out to our listeners at some point and put it out there and ask them, what is the rarest Primus track or Primus cover you've gotten? Just as an aside, I can hang my hat on that I have seen one of two performances, Primus performances of Coattails of a Dead Man. So, yay me.
That's amazing.
It was really cool. And I got really terrible quality video and audio of it that I would love to share, and you'll wonder why I even bothered.
You just called me a bastard, didn't you?
Let's dive in with Los Bastardos. I suppose we could talk about the final product. When we mentioned the samples and the vocals, we have Adam Gates, Mike Borden, and the three guys in Primus who are doing those vocals, just the repetitions of Here They Come, and then lots of assorted vocals, especially near the end, too. There's a lot going on there that can be hard to suss out or pick out. But we also have some samples, and I believe they're all from the TV show, The Young Ones, which was a UK TV show.
That's right. So that's an 80s sitcom from the BBC.
Yeah.
And each phrase is coming from one of the characters in the show. And what is really interesting here is that if we stop and think about Les using samples from that program for Los Bastardos, and also using a sample from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 for Jerry Was a Race Car Driver, and then you consider that around this time, he was recording demos in his apartment bedroom, and those demos also incorporate samples from the television. It looks like this was a period of Primus history where Les was particularly keen into incorporating samples into his music. So the apartment demos that I'm talking about are before the Seas of Cheese record, and at that point it's really interesting, Josh, because Precipitation was actually being considered for Seas of Cheese. As you know, that's a song from Highball with the Devil.
Right.
But it originates from 1991.
Yeah.
Les Claypool recorded a demo in his apartment, and he put some samples from Monty Python into the song. And then we have these samples from the Young Ones in Los Bastardos. So it looks like Les was really eager to incorporate samples at this particular time.
Especially from media that he admired. And of course, we know Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is one of his favorite movies of all time. But he's also been on record, and it might be even in the Over the Electric Grapevine book. He talks about his love of British humor and British comedy from the time period of the 70s and 80s. He does mention Monty Python here and there, but he even digs deeper to more obscure shows that are probably, at this point, unless they're on DVD or have been dug up and remastered for streaming, it might be impossible to find.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, he's very fond of British humor, so it's no surprise that he wanted Noel Fielding on board for the Claypool Land on Delirium video.
Right, yeah, that's another connection. So he clearly, he has a leg up when it comes to, understanding British humor and bringing these sources into his music even and showing that appreciation. So, I didn't know what the Young Ones was for ages and ages, but, I remember staying up my PBS station when I was a kid. My public TV station would run Monty Python reruns in the mid to late 90s on Sunday nights. So I would stay up late knowing I was going to be tired for school the next day, didn't care, and I'd watch Monty Python on this little 9-inch black and white TV that came out of my great-grandmother's house, and my dad said, okay, you can have it in your room. It was like the greatest thing. So I'd stay up and the volume would be really low, and I would watch and kind of try to figure it out. And I really, for me, I have a great appreciation for British sitcoms and British humor too. I feel like we have a connection there, and maybe we can talk shop sometime when we get Les Claypool on, next week. So it's really cool. You have these sources. For these samples. I am going to point out my favorite Here They Come of all the repetitions is the first one, because I think it's less and it sounds really strangled, like he's doing it from the back of his throat or something. He's like, here they come! And it sounds, I don't know what voice he's going for, but it sounds really funny to me. It's my favorite one. And then the chorus kicks in and it's all these guys yelling, here they come, dozens of times.
You just called me a bastard, didn't you?
In your liner notes, if you follow along at home, you're going to see that there are 5 people playing guitar. There are 3 people playing bass guitar and 3 people playing drums on this track. And just by virtue of telling that, when you have 11 people jamming in the studio, you definitely need to hear this one on the 5.1 mix. It opens things up. You can't really tell who's who. You can get just an idea of how fun it must have been to be Ron Rigler on that day to see that take place.
Right.
Let's go down the lineup here. Guitar players first. We have Merv. We have Todd Huth, Derek Greenberg, Matt Weiniger, and Larry Lalonde. Let's start with Merv. In case you're not familiar with Merv, he had a band with that name for many years in the 90s that was pretty popular in the Bay Area and up and down the West Coast, and they played a lot of shows with Primus even. And Merv is, his real name's Mark Haggard. He's the brother of Paul Haggard, who did some photography for Primus. And later, actually, Les would produce Merv's first album, entitled Cosmodrome, on Prawn Song Records. But Merv is also known in the Bay Area as being the guitar player for the Limbo Maniacs, which is another high-energy San Francisco band. And actually, we have 3 of the 4 Limbo Maniacs on this track, which is really cool.
Right, and Merv has also been very active on various Les Claypool projects. For example, I don't know if you're aware of this, Josh, but the first configuration of Duo de Twang was actually Les Claypool and Merv.
I'm going to pretend I knew that because I think I did.
So they did a few shows together, and then for the release of the record, it became Les Claypool and Brian Kehoe. But
right.
The first instance of Duo de Twang was with Merv. Les Claypool has always been very vocal about his praise of Merv. I think he's probably one of his, if not his favorite guitar player ever.
He might be. I mean, he turns up a lot, like Holy Mackerel, as you probably said, and a couple of other lineups too. I think he played with, I want to say, the Fancy Band, or showed up in some kind of iteration.
He was only with the Fancy Band once. Okay. He was the lead guitar player for a really amazing show they did at Bonnaroo, but it was a special configuration of the Fancy Band.
So yeah, Merv's around a lot. And then even nowadays, when Claypool Cellars does their annual car show, Uncle Sea Monster shows up and plays, and that's Merv's band. Next, we have Todd Huth. If you don't know who Todd Huth is, you either haven't been listening to this podcast, but you can definitely go check him out. He's got a band called Porch, which is just fantastic, but he's also, of course, the original guitar player for Primus and shows up on a lot of demos, and shows up momentarily on Frizzle Fry, and here again on Los Bastardos on Sailing the Seas of Cheese. And we're not done with Todd yet. he gets a little bit of run on Pork Soda. Not necessarily he gets credited, but some of the tracks on Pork Soda were around when Todd was in the band, and you're going to hear some of his takes on those tracks. Really cool to have Todd back recording with Primus again, having some fun. Next, we have Derek Greenberg, and I'm going to let you take that one, Frankie, because I think you've interacted with him a few times, right?
I've interacted with Derek, and he's a really kind, very gracious guy. And he's the creative force behind Beanpole. I think the most iconic adjacent Primus project. He's a guitar player, but he's a multi-instrumentalist because he actually played a lot of instruments for the Beanpole tracks, and he also arranged them and recorded them. Some of them he did on his computer. So he's a really, really talented musician. But this is a rare instance of him actually playing with Les Claypool.
Right, yeah, that doesn't happen often. And he's also a member of the Spent Poets.
Right. He was also part of that band, and you can see him very briefly in the Dogtown video.
We actually have 3 of the 4 Spent Poets in this track, so Limbo Maniacs and Spent Poets are very well represented here. And speaking of them, the 4th guitar player on this track is Matt Weiniger, also a Spent Poets fame. Also, as you recall, producer of Frizzle Fry and many Primus demos, way back when he was essentially a high school kid. And if I remember right, Matt was busy working on the Spent Poets album for much of the recording of Sailing the Seas of Cheese and was only able to come up, I think, for this experience. And I think it's in the Grapevine book where he says he was really upset that he wasn't able to be there when Tom Waits was recording his Tommy the Cat vocals.
He had been working on that ever since the Frizzle Fry record, because that's the reason that Michael Malloy ended up on the record, because he was working on it while they were recording Frizzle Fry. So yeah, the work on that album extended over to this one. So he wasn't as present as he would have liked to be, just like you mentioned.
And of course, 5th guitar player is Larry Lalonde. What else can you say? It's Lur. He's the best.
It's Lur.
It's Lur. Let's go to bass. We have 3 bass players. We have Butthouse, which is a wonderful name. We have Adam Gates, and we have Les Claypool. So Butthouse is another member of the Limbo Maniacs, bass player and vocalist for Limbo Maniacs. He also is half of the electronic group Benoit. And I don't know if you've heard any Benoit, Frankie, but it's pretty good music. I really like it, actually. There's a little bit of dub influence on it. There's some chill stuff on their first album, and there's some really upbeat, danceable type stuff on their second album. So those Benoit discs might be hard to come by, but they're pretty cool. And also Butthouse appears on Merv's Cosmodrome album. So these guys are clearly in the same circles and interacting and doing a lot of work together, which is really great. And our next bass player is Adam Gates, Spent Poets, Madame Blavatsky Overdrive. He's the he's the unforgettable
solo work as well.
Yeah, his solo work, and he's Bob Cock, the legendary Bob Cock. He did,
and he's also Monkey Rhythm, and he's also the Filthy Ape.
So many great monikers. He actually used the Filthy Ape moniker when he was doing some electronic music, and also when he had a brief stint in the band Merv. And he also, on Tour de Fromage, he reprised his role playing bass when the band did play Los Bastardos to close out their performance of the album live.
I want to elaborate on that for a little bit, because I think it's really interesting. During live performances of Los Bastardos during Tour de Fromage, Les was actually busy singing and playing the drums at the same time. He actually had a drum that he would play. So if you hear recordings of that tour, you'll notice there's a lot going on percussion-wise during the track. And the reason is that you had Herf pounding at the drums, and you also had Les playing drums. So the bass was relegated to Adam Gates. And, Adam did a great job performing the bass line, but you can immediately tell that it isn't Les Claypool who is playing. And you can tell that just by listening to the live performances. You don't even have to watch a video to realize that Les is on drums. The reason that it sounds so different in contrast to the rest of the songs is that Les Claypool is a really idiosyncratic player. When he grabs a bass guitar, it doesn't matter what brand it is. It doesn't matter how many strings it has. He's going to make the instrument sound his way. And there's no other bass player who can replicate the sound that he does. So even though Adam Gates is performing the song correctly, note by note, it just doesn't sound like Les Claypool, because only Les Claypool can make the bass guitar sound like Primus or sound like a Les Claypool project. And that's something that Sean Lennon agreed on. He said that there are bass players who you cannot recognize if they are playing in isolation without vocals or without a band. But Les Claypool is a bass player that you can immediately recognize because his instrument has its own voice.
And Adam played it pretty straightforward. He didn't do really any embellishments. He pretty much just played it straightforward. And you're right, Les has this snare drum strapped to him, kind of like he's in the marching band. I assume there are videos out there of this, but he also has this headgear on with some lights in it that is so the light is being thrown, out kind of like their goggles or something, and the light's being thrown out. And he's also has a microphone on him, and he is just babbling away, stream of consciousness, or maybe it's a script, I don't know, but he is just yelling all kinds of stuff to mimic the "Here They Come" and all the commentary and all the yelling and so on from the studio track. So it was wonderfully chaotic to witness live. It was really, really cool, and it just felt like things were falling apart in the best way possible. It was really, he's kind of untethered from the bass, and he's just running around being himself.
It wasn't a verbatim performance of the track, because if you go through all the recordings from Tour de Fromage, each rendition of Los Bastardos differs a lot, both in terms of the actual delivery of the track and the duration. There are some concerts where Los Bastardos goes on for 10 to 11 minutes, and there are other ones where it's even as short as just 3 minutes. And as you mentioned, there are some performances where Les is yelling stream of consciousness, and there are others where he's just singing along, Here They Come. And, the most unusual thing is that there are actually some recordings where they play back the young ones' dialogues, but there are others where they don't. So it's kind of strange.
And, of course, our last bass player on this track for Los Bastardos is the inimitable Les Claypool, as you expounded upon. And then as far as drums go, we have 3 drummers. We have Brain, Mike Borden, and Tim. Brain, of course, eventually would drum for Primus and was going to drum for Primus back in 1990, but he broke his foot skateboarding, and that was that. But Brain also played with the Limbo Maniacs. He played with Buckethead on and off for many, many years. He had a project called El Stew that was electronic type music, but he did a lot of live drumming, I think. I have that album somewhere. Did some work with, I think, No Force Field as well. Obviously played with Colonel Claypool's Bucket of Bernie Brains. My 2 favorites that he played with are Tom Waits, because I love Tom Waits. I love also that he played with Guns N' Roses, because it's just so out of place. But he toured with Guns N' Roses in the early 2000s, and I actually went to a Guns N' Roses show because I knew Brain and Buckethead were going to perform, so I went. It wasn't great, and it wasn't their fault. So.
Oh, and it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because I don't know if it's just an urban legend, but I've read that Axl Rose wanted Buckethead to perform without the mask, and he just couldn't get him to do it.
Oh, that's a non-starter right there. That's interesting. I never heard that, though. So Brain is a huge name in the Bay Area as far as drumming. He drums with everybody. You can find him on a million other bands than the ones I named. So cool to have Brain in there, too, because he kind of had to go in a different direction after he broke his foot. And our other drummer that isn't Tim Alexander is Mike Borden, and you might know him from a little band called Faith No More. He also drummed with Ozzy Osbourne's band for many, many, many years. The thing about, and of course, Primus opened for Faith No More many a time in the Bay Area as both those bands were coming up and getting big. Faith No More broke first as far as national notoriety, but they didn't leave Primus behind or anything. Those guys were pretty tight, it seemed. Another thing I wanted to mention is, I think for the Holy Mac album, Les said somewhere, and I think it was in Bass Player Magazine, that he had tapes of himself, Mike Borden, jamming with Kirk Hammett. And he wanted to use some of that stuff for the Holy Mac album, but he said the audio quality wasn't good enough. And I just keep thinking, man, what could have been? Who knows what the content was, but those would be fun jams to hear, because those guys go way back.
Just like the jam sessions of Blue Carey Claypool.
Here's the thing: I don't care if they sound like they were recorded underwater on a passing train. Don't care. I want to hear it. I want to hear any little bit I can get my ears on. So. And Puffy's always been around, and he's credited as Puffy, Puffster. He of course had a hand in the bong water spill on the very expensive, wonderful console over at Different Fur during the Frizzle Fry recording. I'm surprised they let him back in the studio for the second album, but there he is. So Mike Borden appears a lot, and we're actually going to get a reference to him on Pork Soda. So
I know it's really interesting to look at this lineup because it reflects that Primus projects were always a very in-house thing. There was a strong sense of community between these musicians because, as you said, the accident that Brain had led him to take a different path. But, he's still here on this album. And even though Todd Hood dropped out of Primus, he's still on this album. And his melodies would be used for 3 consecutive albums in a row. Yeah. So it's like they've always been together, even if they're not performing live or they're not together in a specific configuration of the band. When I met Primus for the first time, it was with Jay Lane, and Jay signed Seas of Cheese, even though he doesn't play on it, but that's great. That's cool for me. I like having the album signed by Jay Lane.
Nice. Yeah, it's cool to see that Les and Primus and those guys, they keep their friends close and they want to involve their friends and have them around, and it's not just the music. Adam Gates was on the Fromage tour to support on stage, but also he was doing the visuals. Les has a lot of his friends around to do different things, and Soya's one of them, so there's this whole crew, and it's really cool, and they're all the Bastards. So, Fish On was kind of one of those representative tracks of what's actually happening, but Los Bastardos is too in its own way. Like, here we are. Here we come. There's 11 of us. What are you going to do?
Right.
You just called me a bastard, didn't you?
We touched on the live performances and how they operated as far as live performances. But Frankie, you might know. I know that there were 45 Fromage performances, so that's where 45 of the 48 are those other 3 from sets where they did Seas of Cheese in entirety.
So this is where it gets interesting. We have the performances from Tour de Fromage between 2003 and 2004. Uh-huh. And then we have 3 odd performances. So one of them is at the Fox Theatre in Oakland, and another is at the Royal Albert Hall in London. And both of these performances, it makes sense that they played Los Bastardos because they were doing Seas of Cheese on its entirety.
Yeah.
The problem is a performance from Brussels, Belgium, from 2012. This was actually a Primus Mystery of the Week on a previous episode.
Oh, that's right.
Los Bastardos was performed as an encore track after Jerry was a race car driver. And, they were not doing Seas of Cheese in its entirety. It's just a random song performed there. So there's no recording, unfortunately, so we cannot verify if it's really Los Bastardos or there's a lot of possibilities. It could be Here Come the Bastards, and there was perhaps a mistake with the setlist annotation. Less likely, it could be a playback of the studio track. And, the other option is that they actually did Los Bastardos out of full album context, which would be really intriguing.
Because we just think of it in context of the album, yeah. I guess I have to go to Europe to get all the good stuff. When I'm allowed, I will go. Whenever that is. This is about as rare as it gets.
Wynona's Big Brown Beaver. We know it's a Primus hit. It's a huge Primus song. Everybody knows it. But there's a mystery regarding Wynona's Big Brown Beaver. During Tour de Fromage, the band originally set out to perform every single track that had been recorded from Suck on This up to Tales from the Punch Bowl. There were a few omissions from this original mission, and one of them was Wynona's Big Brown Beaver. There's actually a recording from Fromage. It's either Fromage or Hallucinogenetics, but there's a recording where Les starts teasing the bass line from Wynona's Big Brown Beaver, but then he stops and he declares, "I fucking hate that song." So, Wynona's Big Brown Beaver was a persona non grata during this era of Primus. Les hated the song, but if we look at some live statistics, the Frog Brigade performed Wynona's Big Brown Beaver on May 4, 2003 in New Orleans at Tipitina's, but they actually did an 11-minute version of Wynona's Big Brown Beaver at this show. The last performance would be July 13, 2003 at the Mid-Atlantic Music Festival. This is also Frog Brigade, and they teased Wynonna's Big Brown Beaver with the Frog Brigade arrangement during this concert. So if you look at the dates, Josh, from July 13, 2003, the Mid-Atlantic Music Festival, up to October 13, 2003, which is the first Tour de Fromage performance, we're not talking about a huge gap time-wise. Why did Les Claypool become so disenchanted with that song during that short period of time?
Big questions. You always ask the big questions, Frank. We know these mysteries are a long shot to solve, but that's why we put them out there, because one never knows. And that's why Robert Stack was on TV all those years with all these seemingly unbelievable stories.
You just called me a bastard, didn't you?
All right, Frankie, being it's the last track of Sailing the Seas of Cheese, and this is the only album we can really do this with, and I know we skipped a couple tracks doing this, but one more time, let's compare the original release, a portion of the original release with the remaster. Remember, these are vinyl rips, so you're going to hear that warm, wonderful analog tone. I had to stop because I would have just let it go because it's just so fun. But that's a good part because there's some really cool drum work there, and then a couple little guitar things that I like a lot. That's 91, and
my main impression is that the kick drum makes me feel like I'm in the room.
Yeah, it is. It is a banger, especially when you have three drummers going at it and just going balls to the wall. Let's hear that 2013.
It sounds muffled. The kick drum doesn't have the same impact as the original mix. Yeah. So I think the original is the keeper.
Weirdly, I think it's more mid-range on that track than any of the others, or at least I feel like I'm hearing it more. And maybe that's because you have 11 people just bashing away on stuff. So
the thing is that on the 5.1 remaster, it sounds like everything is on the same channel. And when you played the original mix, it sounded like each instrument, each vocal, and each element of the track had its own space.
Well, they definitely have more space on the actual surround 5.1 mix. So if that Kickstarter ever gets off the ground and we get you that system, you can really hear it in all its glory. Well, hey, Los Bastardos, no me llames bastardo, because you've been tracked. Folks, hey, that's it. That's Sailing the Seas of Cheese. We made it through this this just honorable, respectable, and I'm going to use the word now, virtuous Primus album. Possibly their most respected album, as Les Claypool says.
Another milestone for us, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a blast. So we have three between album interviews coming up. The next episode, you're going to hear us talk to Jay Blakesberg, longtime photographer. After that, you're going to hear us talking with Webster Colcord, who did animations for a variety of Claypool-related videos. After that, you get a conversation between ourselves and Gabby Lala. How great is that?
And trust us, each conversation is absolutely amazing. Yeah. You're going to learn a ton, and I really mean it, a ton of details and things that Josh and I have no clue about. So we guarantee your minds are going to be blown.
It's always good when Frankie learns something new, because I am astonished when that happens. And also, we've been sitting on these three interviews for quite some time, so I'm really glad that we're finally getting to them. After those interviews, we're going to pick up with Miscellaneous Debris. We're going to take a big old swig of pork soda, and we'll go from there. And we'll see you next time. Later days.
Willie Mays.